A billionaire pulls into a gas station at 6:47 a.m. By 6:49, a homeless man says one sentence that makes him abandon everything. His company, his wife, his name. This isn't a fall from grace story, it's what comes after. The morning was too quiet for a Monday. Maxwell Green noticed it the moment he stepped out of his Aston Martin, his leather shoes crunching faintly against the gravel of the gas station lot. The air smelled like gasoline and burnt coffee. He adjusted the collar of his pressed navy coat, checked his Rolex. 6:47 a.m. early, even for him. The gas station on Route 31 wasn't his usual stop. Normally, his driver filled the car while Max skimmed financial reports from the back seat. But last night, he'd had too many bourbons, told his driver to take the night off, and driven himself to the lake house, where the silence hit harder than the alcohol ever could. He stood at pump 3, squeezing the handle, watching the numbers spin. The sound was soothing in its repetition. Soothing enough, maybe, to drown out the echo of Elise's voice from the night before. "You've got everything, Max, and somehow you've lost yourself." Max clenched his jaw. He hadn't responded. He never did. Words were weapons and silence was his shield. "You ever think about just leaving it all behind?" The voice came from behind him, raspy, low, and so unexpected that Max turned too quickly, almost dropping the pump. There stood a man in a filthy green jacket, torn at the seams, beard like tangled wire, face aged in a way that had nothing to do with years and everything to do with weather and pain. A large duffel bag sat slumped by his feet, duct-taped in places. He held a coffee cup, steam rising in a lazy swirl. "Excuse me," Max said, blinking. It wasn't anger, just surprise. People didn't usually speak to him this way. Not here, not anywhere. The man smiled, revealing 2 gold teeth and a few missing ones. "I asked if you ever think about disappearing, leaving all the noise behind, starting over." Max hesitated. "No," he lied. The man didn't push. He just sipped his coffee, eyes scanning Max like a man who'd once worn the same shoes. He nodded at the car. "Nice ride. Aston Martin, right? DB11. Max nodded, cautious. "You know cars." The man chuckled. "I used to sell them, back when my life had walls and a roof." That answer unsettled Max more than he expected. They stood in silence for a beat, only the hum of the pump and a distant bird call filling the space. Max felt a tug of discomfort. He should have just ignored the guy, climbed back into the car, driven back to the city, forgotten the whole thing by brunch. But something in the man's eyes, that strange clarity, made him stay. "You used to sell them. What happened?" The man exhaled slowly, then looked at Max with something between humor and sorrow. "I believed I was invincible. My ego was bigger than my credit line. Thought I was too smart to fall. You know how that ends." Max looked down, pretending to check the pump, but the story hit too close to home. Elise had said something similar, hadn't she? The man continued, "Had the wife, the kid, the job, lost 'em all in 5 years. Now I sleep behind the hardware store 2 blocks down, but I drink good coffee, so there's that." Max didn't know what to say. He wanted to ask for the man's name, but part of him didn't. It made the man more like a parable than a person, easier to handle that way. "Why are you telling me this?" Max asked. The man shrugged. "You look like a guy standing at a fork in the road pretending it's a straight line." Max swallowed. A response hovered on the edge of his lips, but he said nothing. "Anyway," the man said, reaching for his bag, "don't mind me. Just another bum with a story. You take care." He started to walk off, the duffel dragging behind him. Max watched him go until he disappeared around the corner of the station. For a long time, Max didn't move. The pump had stopped. The nozzle clicked once, twice, then fell silent. He slid it back into place and got into his car. But he didn't start it. He just sat there, hands on the wheel, staring at his reflection in the rearview mirror, a suit, a watch, a perfect jawline, a stranger. Then he did something he hadn't done in years. He turned off his phone. Max drove aimlessly, the Aston Martin gliding over the cracked asphalt like it was silk. Towns blurred past, brick buildings, mom-and-pop diners, faded for sale signs, and rusted pickup trucks sitting like sleeping beasts under sagging carports. He ended up in a place called Elmswood, a speck on the map with a shuttered movie theater and a main street that hadn't seen life since 1993. He parked in front of a laundromat with a blinking open sign, got out and walked. He didn't know what he was looking for, maybe just distance, maybe someone to tell him what the hell he was doing with his life. By noon, Max was sitting on a bench outside a pawn shop, staring at a cracked sidewalk. That man's words still clung to him like the smell of gasoline. You look like a guy standing at a fork in the road, pretending it's a straight line. What fork? Max had spent 20 years building his empire, green capital, from the bones of failed banks and desperate men. He clawed his way up. He'd done what he had to do, sacrificed weekends, family dinners, birthdays, sleep, even Elise in a way. He rubbed his face, then pulled out his phone. Still off. He hesitated, thumb hovering. One swipe and the world would rush back in emails, texts, calendar reminders, his assistant's voice asking about Tokyo, or worse, his lawyer's voice asking about the SEC. Instead, he slipped it into his coat and walked into the diner across the street. It was the kind of place where time slowed down. Vinyl booths patched with duct tape, a jukebox in the corner that hadn't worked since the Bush administration. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with a purple scrunchie and eyes like a steel trap, handed him a menu without asking anything. She just nodded and said, "Coffee." Max nodded back, "Sure." She poured it without ceremony, black and hot. A few minutes later, a voice startled him. "You lost, stranger." Max turned. A boy, maybe 17, stood at the counter, wiry, blue hoodie, sharp eyes that reminded him of his younger brother Carter, except Carter was gone, 5 years now. "Just passing through," Max replied. The kid smirked. "That's what they all say before they move here and start working at Dan's Auto." Max cracked a smile. "You work there?" "Hell no, I got plans, big ones." That phrase, "I got plans," triggered something. Max used to say it all the time, before money made him forget what they were. The kid slid into the booth across from him without asking, "You from New York?" Max blinked. "How'd you know?" "Shoes." Max glanced down. Italian leather, custom stitch, $900. You that observant with everyone? The kid shrugged. "Just the ones who look like they hate their life." There it was again, the stranger's echo. Another fork, another mirror. The kid extended a hand. "I'm Wheeze." Max hesitated, then took it. "Max." Wheeze leaned back. "So what's your story, Max? You running from something or looking for something?" Max took a long sip of coffee before answering. "Does it matter?" Wheeze grinned. "Always." Max couldn't help but laugh. "You should be in sales." "Not a chance. I'm gonna be a pilot, Air Force, then maybe commercial, get the hell out of this place, see the world." Max admired the confidence, the clarity. He used to have that too. "You ever think you could end up somewhere else entirely?" Max asked. "Not by choice, but because you screwed up and didn't notice until it was too late." Wheeze nodded solemnly, as if he understood. "My dad used to say, life turns on you when you stop turning with it." He said that right before he drove off and never came back. There it was again, another person with a missing piece, another wound dressed in casual words. Max leaned back, surprised by how heavy everything suddenly felt. We stood. "Nice meeting you, Max." "You too." The kid walked out, leaving behind an empty seat and a silence that filled Max's chest like water. He realized with a strange pang that he didn't want to go back yet. Not to the office, not to the meetings, not to Elise and her silence. Instead, he pulled a napkin toward him and started to write. Not numbers, not business strategy. Just a name. Michael Rivers. The name he used when he was broke and nobody knew him. A version of himself he hadn't seen in 20 years. And beneath it, he wrote a question. What would Michael do now? Max checked into the only motel in Elmswood without using his real name. The clerk barely looked up from her romance novel. Cash or card? Cash. She handed him a key attached to a chunk of wood big enough to stop a door. Room 6, No ID, no questions. The room smelled like old drapes and lost dreams, a faded floral bedspread, one light bulb, the kind of place where secrets came to die. Max sat on the edge of the bed, still holding the napkin from the diner. Michael Rivers. He hadn't used that name since he was 23 and sleeping on a friend's couch in Jersey, trying to sell insurance policies to anyone with a pulse. Back then, the future wasn't a roadmap. It was a cliff with a rope, and somehow he'd climbed. But maybe he'd climbed the wrong mountain. He left the motel and walked, past the auto shop, past a church with flacking paint and a hand-painted sign that said, "No judgment, just coffee." Eventually he found himself back at the gas station from earlier, not the same one, but the same brand, same scent, same ghost of a man in his head. He half expected to see him there. That stranger, the homeless man who'd cracked his life open with a single sentence. But there was only a bored teen behind the counter and the hum of a cooler filled with Red Bull and stale sandwiches. Max bought a pack of gum, and for the first time in years he made no calls, no emails, no transactions. Just walked back to his motel and sat in silence, listening to the rattle of the air conditioner like it was trying to breathe for him. At midnight he dreamed of water, of drowning, and someone watching him from the shore, not helping, just watching. The next morning, Max found himself at the town library, a squat brick building with dusty windows and a handwritten open sign. Inside, it smelled of yellowed paper and old ambition. He wandered between the stacks, not reading, just thinking. A woman with gray hair and a tight bun approached him. "Can I help you find something?" Max blinked. "Honestly, I'm not sure what I'm looking for." She smiled like she'd heard that before. "Well, sometimes the looking is enough." He nodded, then paused. "Do you know a place in town I could volunteer?" She tilted her head. "Not many visitors ask that." "I'm not really a visitor." "Still, try Grace House. They take help." He walked the 2 blocks she pointed to and stood outside the building. Grace House wasn't a house, really, more like a repurposed school with a crooked cross above the doorway. Inside, the air buzzed with motion. A young woman handed out socks. An old man organized canned food. Kids ran in a blur past folding chairs. Max hovered near the door until someone noticed him. "You here for the meeting or the food line?" It was a woman with dark curls, paint on her hands, and the kind of eyes that looked straight through pretense. "Neither," Max said. "I was told you might need help." She raised an eyebrow. "You know how to fix a sink?" "No." "Paint a room?" "Not really." She crossed her arms. "Ever hold someone's hand while they cried?" Max hesitated, then once. "Good enough," she said, tossing him a paint-streaked t-shirt. "Name's Lauren. You can start by not screwing up the trim in the community room." And just like that, Max found himself holding a paintbrush in a room full of peeling walls and forgotten hopes. Every stroke felt like penance, every breath a little lighter. Hours passed. Lauren moved around him like she belonged in every space, no hesitation, no apology. When she caught him watching her, she didn't look away. "You don't look like a guy who paints for free." Max smirked. "I don't even look like a guy who paints." She laughed low, rich, unexpected. "You from the city?" "Used to be." "Running from something?" "Trying to remember who I was before I started running." She didn't press. At the end of the day, his hands were blistered, his back ached, and he felt something he hadn't in years: useful. Lauren handed him a bottle of water and said, "You showing up again tomorrow?" Max stared at her for a long moment before answering. "Yeah, I think I am." 3 days passed. Max painted walls, hauled boxes, folded blankets, and swept floors. No one asked who he was. No one cared what he'd done. And somehow, that felt more intimate than all the business dinners and boardroom applause in his old life combined. Lauren treated him like a man, not a brand. She cursed when she dropped things. She didn't smile unless she meant it. And she never once asked him what he used to do, as if she instinctively knew he wasn't ready to tell the truth out loud. But the silence between them wasn't empty. It was warm, curious. full of invisible threads pulling taut. On Friday afternoon, they sat on the front steps of Grace's house, watching kids draw chalk rainbows on the sidewalk. The air smelled like sun-warmed asphalt and hope. "You're different than the other guys who show up here," Lauren said, sipping from a bottle of orange soda. "Yeah. They usually want something: credit, attention, redemption." Max looked down at his hands, the paint still under his fingernails. "What do you think I want?" Lauren thought for a moment. Permission. He didn't ask her to explain. She didn't need to. Later that night, Max walked through town in the quiet, past shuttered storefronts and streetlights that flickered like they were half awake. He paused outside the diner. It was closed, but he could still see the booth where he'd met Wheeze. He wondered where the kid was now, if he'd gotten out, or if, like most people in places like this, he'd gotten older and smaller at the same time. Back at the motel, Max lay on the stiff mattress, staring at the ceiling. He didn't sleep, he just waited. By dawn, something had cracked open inside him. He reached for his phone. For the first time in 5 days, he turned it on. The screen exploded with notifications. Emails, missed calls, voicemails from Elise, from his CFO, from an unknown number marked urgent. One message made his hand go cold. Carter Green Estate Inquiry. He stared at the name. Carter, his brother. 5 years ago, Carter had overdosed in a warehouse in Brooklyn, alone, after Max refused to answer his call. It had been a Tuesday. Max remembered because he was closing the Midtown deal, the one that made him $14 million in a single hour. The call came at 4:12 p.m. He saw the name. Ignored it. Carter had died at 5:07 p.m. Max had told himself it wouldn't have mattered, that Carter was already too far gone, that addicts made their choices, that he had a meeting. He told himself all of that, repeatedly. Now the lies rang hollow. He opened the message. It was from a lawyer. Apparently, Carter had a daughter. Her name was June. 7 years old. No known mother, no living relatives. And now no home. The lawyer's tone was cold, procedural. They were attempting to locate next of kin. If Max could confirm his identity, custody might be an option, or at the very least, financial responsibility. Max stared at the screen for a long, long time. A daughter. His brother had a daughter. And now she was alone in the world, just like Carter had been when Max left him behind. The motel room suddenly felt smaller, tighter, like a mistake he couldn't unmake. At 9:12 a.m., Max walked back into Grace's house and found Lauren scrubbing a coffee urn. "I need to tell you something," he said, voice hollow. She looked up. "Okay. My name's not Michael Rivers, it's Maxwell Green. I run a private equity firm in Manhattan. I have a penthouse, a driver, and a yacht I don't even use. I left all of it 2 weeks ago. I met a homeless man at a gas station who made me realize I hated my life. I've been here trying to forget who I am, but today I remembered something worse." Lauren said nothing. Max took a breath that felt like swallowing glass. "My brother overdosed 5 years ago. I ignored his last call. I just found out he had a daughter, a little girl named June. She's in foster care." He shook his head slowly. "I don't know what to do." Lauren set the urn down, walked over, and placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "You do," she said softly. "You just don't want to be the kind of man who would have done it 5 years ago." Max closed his eyes. And for the first time he cried. June was small for 7, thin arms, wide eyes, hair in 2 crooked braids that looked like they were done in a hurry, maybe by a foster mom, maybe by June herself. She sat on a worn-out beanbag in the corner of the child welfare office, coloring quietly. The fluorescent lights above her flickered like tired promises. Max stood in the doorway, heart hammering. A caseworker spoke in clipped sentences beside him, her tone efficient, bordering on numb. "She doesn't speak much, only recently placed. The last home wasn't ideal." Max nodded, barely hearing. He was staring at June, his niece, the only family he had left, and she looked so much like Carter it hurt to breathe. He took a step forward, then another. June looked up, her crayon pausing mid-sky. "You're tall," she said. It was the first thing she said to him, a sentence both innocent and disarming. Max knelt down slowly. "So are you for a superhero?" She blinked. "I'm not a superhero." "Not yet," he said, "but you've got the eyes for it." A tiny smile flickered at the edge of her mouth. It would take weeks before she spoke more than 3 sentences in a row. But that first moment, that simple exchange, carved a space inside Max he didn't know was empty. The process was messy, legally, emotionally, logistically. Max flew back to the city for 2 days, told Elise everything. She was stunned, not by the fact he'd left, that part she seemed to understand, but by the fact he came back with a child on his mind instead of a merger. "She's my brother's daughter," he said, "which means she's mine too." Elise looked at him carefully. "Do you even know what it means to raise a child, Max?" "No," he said honestly, "but I know what it means to lose one." Elise didn't argue, but she didn't follow him back to Elmswood either. He hired a lawyer, a therapist, a tutor. He kept working remotely, just enough to keep the company alive but not enough to keep it central. Lauren helped. She didn't babysit. She didn't coddle. She taught Max how to listen without fixing, how to sit on the floor beside a grieving child and not talk her out of her sadness. And June, in her quiet way, let him in. One night, Max found her sitting on the motel bed, holding an old photo he'd left on the nightstand, a snapshot of Carter from a summer they spent at a lake in upstate New York. "That's my dad," she whispered. Max sat beside her. "Yeah, that's him. He was funny." He also got lost sometimes." She looked up at him. "Are you lost?" Max didn't answer right away. Then he wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "I was, then I found you." June leaned into him, small and warm and real. And just like that, Max Green, former billionaire, current drifter, became something else entirely. He became someone's home. Spring came fast in Elmswood. Crocuses burst through the thawing earth like they'd been holding their breath all winter. The town woke up with them, slower than the flowers, but just as stubborn. Max bought a small house on the edge of town. Nothing glamorous. 2 bedrooms, a sagging porch, a yard full of dandelions. But it had a working fireplace and a tree in the backyard that June immediately named Captain Branch. Lauren helped him paint the kitchen, pale yellow, bright like morning. "This color is hopeful," she said, dipping the roller again. "I didn't know colors had emotions." She gave him a look. "Everything has emotions, Max. You just used to pay people not to feel them." He laughed, and it felt like breathing. On weekends, June drew pictures of clouds and monsters and a little girl holding hands with a man in a suit. She never explained them. Max didn't ask. He just kept them on the fridge, in a folder, once even in his wallet. One afternoon, the lawyer called again. "There's an offer," he said, "a large one. A hedge fund wants to buy Green Capital outright. 7 figures clean, no strings. They'll liquidate, rebrand, and be done." Max was quiet. "You want to walk away," the lawyer continued. "This is how you do it." Max sat on the back steps of the house, watching June chase fireflies with a jar full of holes. The porch light flickered above him, catching the edge of her braid, the curve of her cheek, the weight of what she didn't say out loud. He thought about what that money used to mean, what it bought him, how many rooms it filled that still somehow echoed. He called Lauren. "Should I sell it?" he asked. "Do you want to?" "No," he admitted, "but part of me wonders if I should, like putting a nail in the coffin of who I used to be." Lauren's voice softened. "Max, you don't have to kill your past to bury it, you just have to stop feeding it." He let out a breath. "So what do I feed instead?" "The future." He ended up selling the company. Not for revenge, not for reinvention, but to release it like a weight tied to a version of himself he no longer owed anything to. With the money, he set up a trust for June, quiet, untouchable. He gave bonuses to his staff, huge ones, sent anonymous donations to addiction recovery programs across New York. One check he mailed with no return address, just a note that said, "For Carter, I'm sorry I was late." Lauren found the letter one day. She didn't ask about it, just kissed his cheek and kept sorting donated shoes. On the one-year anniversary of Carter's death, Max took June to the lake from the old photo. She waded into the water, shivering, laughing. "It's cold." Max stood on the shore, hands in his pockets, watching her, smiling. Then June called to him, "Come in." He hesitated. "Why?" she asked. "Because I don't like the cold," he said. She tilted her head. "Then be brave." And he realized in that moment that bravery wasn't always about leaping from rooftops or fighting fires. Sometimes it was choosing to be known, to be vulnerable, to get wet. So Max stepped into the water, freezing, alive, and full of everything he never knew he needed. Max didn't go back to being a millionaire. Not in the traditional sense. He kept what he needed, gave away the rest. He wore the same 3 shirts most weeks, drove a used truck with a dent in the fender, and learned to repair drywall with YouTube videos and bruised thumbs. He didn't miss the skyscrapers, the tailored suits, the $20 million view that no one ever actually looked at. Instead, he learned to find beauty in the small things. June's laughter as she jumped on the couch, even when he told her not to. The way Lauren hummed under her breath while washing dishes. How the house creaked at night like it was settling in too. Grace House became part of his rhythm. He helped organize food drives, painted a mural with the local teens, hosted board game nights that devolved into chaotic joy and overturned candy bowls. People still asked, sometimes, usually in whispers, "Isn't that the guy who used to own all those buildings in New York?" He'd just smile, "Used to." Then one day, something unexpected arrived in the mail. A letter from the homeless man. Max had nearly forgotten him, the stranger at the gas station who started it all. The letter was written in tight, looping script. "Max or Michael, or whoever you are now. You bought me coffee that day. You listened. I didn't expect that. Just so you know, I got clean, went to a program near Albany, been working at a shelter for vets now, got my first apartment in years. It's small, but it's mine. You said nothing that day, but I saw the storm behind your eyes. I see it in a lot of people. I hope you found something calm inside you. I told you to leave the noise, not because I wanted you to run, but because I hoped you'd finally stop. Whatever you chose, I hope it feels like peace." Lar. Max read the letter twice, then a third time. Then he folded it carefully and placed it in the drawer beside June's drawings and Carter's photo. That evening he lit a fire in the backyard pit. June roasted marshmallows. Lauren read a book. The dog, a mutt they named Oliver, snored at Max's feet. "Hey, Dad," June said, her mouth sticky with sugar, "do you think people can really change?" Max looked up at the stars, then back at her. "I think the right kind of change feels like remembering," he said. "Like waking up after a long sleep and realizing you're exactly where you're supposed to be." She nodded like that made perfect sense. And for the first time in his life, Maxwell Green or Michael Rivers, or whoever he was now, understood what wealth really was. It wasn't the number in your bank account. It was the people who remembered your name when you had nothing left to offer. It was the silence that didn't ask you to prove yourself. It was the tiny hand reaching for yours in the dark, trusting you to lead them into the light. And it was the sound of a little girl whispering, "Good night, Dad," just before the world went still.